I want to bring in a man who says that the S&P was right in downgrading the U.S., and he doesn't believe the budget deal that was reached last week is sustainable. Well, joining us from Washington is Fred Bergsten. He's director of the Peterson Institute for International Economics, and Fred was Treasury Assistant Secretary for International Affairs before joining Peterson. Fred, thanks so much for joining us today. We are waiting for the president, of course, to make remarks at 1 p.m. Maybe you can set it up for us a little bit. What would you expect to hear, and what would you like to hear?
I'd like to hear a serious program to cut the budget deficit. The famous debt deal that was reached a week ago doesn't do any budget cutting. It puts in place a lot of procedures. It sets up a committee. It relies on future processes after the next election, but it doesn't cut anything out of the budget deficit. What we need instead is a real program that would do three things, that would have tangible, specific, therefore credible cuts in the budget. Second, cuts that would phase in over several years. We don't want to trash the already weak economy now, but things that would phase in over time. And third, there should be measures that we need to do for long-run economic reasons anyway. I'll give you a couple of examples. Raising the retirement ages for both Social Security and Medicare. That would phase in over time. It would maintain the solvency of those programs, and it would be credible and tangible. Likewise, on the revenue side, we need some kind of gasoline or energy tax. Phase in $1 a gallon gasoline tax, 10 cents a year for 10 years. Or put in a value-added tax of 5%, phased in 1 percentage point per year. Those are the kinds of measures that I think will convince the markets we have our debt and deficits under control, that will avoid trashing the current short-run economic difficulties, and will deal with some of our long-run structural problems. That's what's needed, not procedures, promises, and processes that may or may not be realized. And that, in my view, underlies the Standard & Poor's decision to downgrade the debt. They're not convinced that it's going to take place even on the limited schedule that was supposedly decided and announced a week ago.
Fred, you, just before we went to break, actually gave us a plan. You're one of the few people in Washington that seems to have a plan, but I got to ask you, you talk about raising Social Security, perhaps even raising taxes, not extending the Bush tax cuts, maybe we phrase it that way. Doesn't that mean you're effectively putting debt ahead of jobs, and is that the right decision at the moment?
No, as I said in describing my proposal, you have to simultaneously address the debt problem in a credible and therefore concrete way, but you need to phase in the budget cuts respecting the current weak position of the economy. That means phase in those budget cuts over an extended period of time. The examples I gave would do that, and they would also deal with long-run structural problems of the economy. If you raise the retirement age for Social Security and or Medicare, that would inherently be phased in over a period of 10 or even 20 years. But it would save trillions of dollars, therefore be credible as a tangible step. Likewise, there have to be some revenue increases if we're going to bring the debt profile down to a sustainable level. Again, the way to do that is to phase in tax increases. I suggest a gasoline tax or a value-added tax, so we would tax consumption, not saving. That's also good for the long-run future of the economy. Those could be phased in over a 5-year period, a 10-year period, to avoid worsening the weak economy. So you have to devise strategies that will simultaneously strengthen or at least avoid weakening the economy in the short run, but credibly bring the debt problem down over the long term, or else the public will have no confidence, no sense of future prospects that will provide then the underlying psychology to get things back on track.
Fred, let me ask you, you and a number of people have put out what are seemingly reasonable proposals. Clearly, though, this administration is struggling in terms of leadership, some now calling for Geithner to step down after hearing that, in fact, he was going to stay on through 2012. Will we get anything done, or is it in D.C. so polarized at this point, but that for the next 2 years it's unlikely to see anything happen?
Well, that comes back to the downgrade. The downgrade, as the market is saying today, does not per se have any big effect. Treasuries are strong. The downgrade of Treasury has not had an adverse impact. But it's symbolic that unless we get on a credible path, and I stress credible path, to correct the debt and deficit problems, the economy is going to continue to languish. We know that it takes a long time to get out of a financially based recession of the type we've had. Deleveraging takes a long time. You cannot expect any quick fixes. But if you do nothing about the underlying debt and deficit problems, then it's going to be even longer to get out of it. And that's why you have to fashion a strategy that both deals with the long-run problem and respects the short-run weakness of the economy. Leadership is required. That's all one can say. They did not show it in the debt deal announced a week ago. That relies totally on procedures and processes. It mainly kicked the can down the road. That is just not acceptable. The downgrade is a reflection of that. Hopefully that will add to the pressure to get some serious action taken in the near future.
All right, Fred, thanks so much for joining us.